Hi friends, I've got a lovely floral painting for you today. This is a gorgeous gladioli taken from my own reference photo. I'm using the alla prima oil painting technique. So let's dive in. So I've pre-toned the canvas with some burnt umber acrylic. This is an acrylic wash put on quite thinly. And I've allowed that to dry and then transferred my image over onto the canvas. Now what you're seeing at the moment is a very pale violet colour, and this is actually from Gamblin's Artist Oil Colours. It's from their Radiant range of colours. I'm not using any medium at all. I'm working very dry and actually applying that paint quite thinly. I'm really sort of pushing and using my brush strokes to push that paint into the weave of the canvas. So once I've got my light tones in and I've preserved those lights, I switch to a purple tone, this is actually cobalt violet, and I begin to add the mid-tone values that I can see in these flowers. Here I've just added a little extra dioxazine purple right at that darker point inside the centre of the flower. Notice how I'm painting around those lighter areas for now, as we're just doing the blocking in stages. My intention is to work wet into wet, alla prima, and aim to finish these flowers in one sitting. You'll also notice that I'm picking up little hints of blue and sometimes even alizarin crimson, and that's just to keep some variety within these purple tones. Now once I've actually blocked in one of the petals, you'll see me using this back and forth stroke and blending, but always make sure you're blending in the direction that the petal is leaning. So you'll see this back and forth stroke and this very, very gentle pressure as I blend those darker tones into that initial light colour. This is actually from my own reference photo. I was at a friend's and they had this beautiful gladioli growing against this trellis, and I thought it would make a really lovely painting. I'm working quite small today. This is a 5x7 inch canvas and I'm really enjoying painting on these smaller canvases. Notice how I'm creating all the details within that petal by using this back and forth stroke. It's almost like a windscreen wiping action. I'm dragging one colour into the next. This is the beauty of oils, is you can get some gorgeous soft blends, but I am very, very careful that I don't lose that lovely highlighted area. I'm carefully taking these one petal at a time so that I don't get lost in all these overlapping petals. Once I'm happy with the initial blocking in of the flowers, I want to establish the background. Initially, I'm just beginning by finding my way where the trellis is, and then I'll be able to work a little bit on that background landscape that you can see in the distance. This fence basically is a very light wash of some burnt sienna with white, and you'll notice I'm not putting it on very heavy. I do intend to go back with some shading and some extra details, but for now I just want to establish where the trellis is so that I can work on that background. Now that background is basically made up of just some small blobs of different shapes. It's a little bit lighter at the top, as you see in some of the sky area, and then further down you see much more of the distant garden. So basically we've just got some light and dark shapes that I'm going to just blob on there, and then we'll blend them all out and make them look like they've got that lovely depth of field and that photography out of focus background. I'm really not overthinking this background, really just putting those lovely random shapes on there, just keeping them nice and soft, but I'm not applying the paint very thick. I do intend to go back and use a mop to soften this, and we don't want to be smearing a lot of thick heavy paint, so I am pushing that paint, those little blob shapes, into the weave of the canvas. It's not going on very heavy. Once I've got everything in place, I'm using a nice soft mop, and you'll notice I'm using more of a tapping action, and again that's so that I don't smear that paint everywhere. I want to soften and blend and get that lovely depth of field, but not smear all the colours so it all blurs into one single colour. I'm constantly wiping the brush in between, so when you see the brush going off camera, that's because I'm giving it a wipe on some paper towel. And here you'll see me doing a little bit of finger painting, using some titanium white and adding little circles with my finger to create that bokeh effect. And again, go back with that mop to soften. Now that my background is all taken care of, I'm putting my attention back onto the fence. I'm using some burnt umber now and wanting to start adding some darker details, some of those shadow tones on the fence area. Once I've done the darks, I'll switch to a lighter colour and start putting on some highlights. So we add that initial mid-tone with that burnt sienna and white, we put some darks on, and then we go back with a lighter colour. Now that the background is complete, I can bring my attention back to the flowers and start adding some finer details. Remember, we're still working alla prima, we're still working wet into wet. So as you start to build up these layers now, the paint will start to go a little bit thicker. As we start to work through the flowers, I'm really concentrating on contrast. I want to see where I can get some darker darks and some lighter lights. I'm also looking to add some details as well. I'm adding in more blues and more of that crimson, and that's really just to keep a lot of variety in the painting. Even though I'm not necessarily seeing this in the reference photograph, it is nice to use some artistic license and throw in these other colours. So once I've got some darker tones in there, I'll go back with a soft mop and just gently blend everything out. I'm using that mop very, very lightly. Now I'm starting to look for my lighter tones. So again, going right into the center of those petals and looking where I can see that highlight. Once I feel I have enough lights and darks in place, I'll begin working on those center stamens. Finally, I'll take a liner brush and edge some of these petals with some white. And some of these petals are actually edged with a darker tone. So here I'm using some of that dioxazine purple to add an edge to this petal. Finally, I add some foreground leaves using an initial mid-tone and then picking out some highlighted areas. And when you're happy, you can sign your painting. I always use a little bit of medium to thin down the paint so that it's nice and inky, and I'm able to use a liner brush to sign and date my painting. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, you'll absolutely love my latest course, which is available on the MazArt Academy, and I'll leave a link to that in the description box below. I really do hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you did, let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.